Yep. Okay. Let's talk about the Haylou. So the Haylou, this is the Haylou PurFree. It's a new bone conduction headset, and I gotta be honest, there are a lot of new bone conduction headphones out there. Just go to Amazon, type in bone conduction, and you're gonna find, well, you're probably gonna run into a lot of products from the company called Shokz, but you're also probably gonna run into a lot of much cheaper products from other companies that you've probably not heard of. And this has kind of been my experience with bone phones, is that the stuff made by Shokz is pretty excellent. And that's what I use. That's almost exclusively what I use. Is I've got two main pairs of Shokz that I use right now, but I've gone through a number of other sets before that as I upgraded and just kind of got the newest stuff. But I've got like a set of Shokz that I have connected at all times to my work computer, and I use that for video conferencing. And then I've got another pair of Shokz that I have connected to my phone, and I use that for podcasting and YouTube, etc. All this is to say that I love Shokz, and every time I've used other bone conduction sets, I've been pretty disappointed in the number of times that I've used other bone conduction sets. Like there was one other that I reviewed on the channel called, it was like the Bone Adder or something like that. That was pretty mediocre. I also initially, like the first bone conduction thing I bought was a Panasonic wired bone conduction headband. Actually had a very similar form factor to the Shokz, but I don't know, maybe I should go back to that now that I've got a powerful amplifier. But as I recall, it just really did not get very loud over a wire on anything that I could plug it into at that time. I also just it did not sound very good. And then the last bone conduction thing that I tried was Eco's, I forget what they even call it, Eco, the company that made the Eco OH1 and the OH10, they actually came out with a bone conduction set, and I don't know, it is not that good. So to be perfectly honest, like I just kind of got to the point, especially after that Eco one, where I was like, I'm not really going to bother with other bone conduction sets, except for the Shokz stuff, because I know it's reliable and it's pretty good. It's pretty stinking good. But why do I have this Haylou PurFree here with me now? So Haylou actually reached out to me, and this is not a sponsored thing. That sounded like I was heading into a sponsored thing, but they reached out to me saying, hey, you want to review this thing? And I basically told them everything that I just told you right now, which is every time I use bone phones, they kind of let me down unless they're Shokz. And so I'm not really that interested in reviewing your product. I'm sorry. They did not take no for an answer. They kept writing me. I guess props to them, whatever. But basically what they were trying to pitch me on was that they have apparently hired someone that used to work at Shokz, and because of that, they think their bone phones are really good. They referred to other bone conductions that aren't Shokz as counterfeit bone conduction. I don't really know what that means. But basically, they were just really adamant that the PurFree was going to be a better experience than I had with the other non-Shokz bone phones. So I basically told them, you can send it to me. I'll check it out. I'll give you some feedback. And if I think it's any decent, I'll talk about it on a video. So I'm talking about it on a video, which I guess is a clue that I actually think it's pretty decent. So we will talk about this thing. Up front, pricing on the Haylou PurFree is $120, which I think is a bit of a miss. I think it should be a little bit cheaper. Not mostly just because the reason that the bone conduction market apart from Shokz exists is because Shokz are a little bit on the pricey side. The set that I use for the most part, they now call the Open Run. The price on that is $130. And most of the cheaper bone phones are like $60, sometimes $80, but think like $60 for the cheap stuff that I think sucks. Again, I don't recommend it. But $120 is kind of like where the benchmark is. And $130. These come in at $120. I think it's basically the same price as the Shokz Open Runs. And I guess we'll talk about in what ways I think these things are as good. Some ways I think they're worse. In some ways I think they're actually a little bit better. We'll talk about that. But the basic gist I wanted to get to was like, I do feel like there is room in the market for a sub $100 bone phone that doesn't suck. This thing's on sale right now for a little bit under $100. I feel like if their standard price was under $100, that would help them out quite a bit. But I don't know, maybe I'm getting a little bit too deep into product advice for this company when I should just be telling you guys what I think about it. So let's go to the table, take a look here at the Haylou PurFree. And Form factor wise, this probably, if you've seen my other bone phones, in fact, here we go. Here's my pair of Shokz Aeropex, aka the new open runs. Does this look familiar? Because these things look very much the same. In fact, in a number of ways, the Haylous really are biting off a lot from the Aftershokz. In terms of, I believe, the build quality, they claim that this is a titanium headband, same that Shokz always puts in their headbands is a titanium headband. They are both wrapped in this same kind of like soft touch silicone covering, which I don't know, generally is pretty nice feeling, I'll be honest. The other thing that's interesting is that even the button configuration is exactly the same as the Shokz. So they've got a button over here. Let's punch it on that so you can take a look. They've got a button over here on the earpiece. Right, here's the Haylous, here's the Shokz. And then down here on the bottom, they've both got the same, well, it's not the same, but they both have a magnetic charging port next to volume up and down buttons. And then the volume up and down buttons also double as power on and off and Bluetooth pairing and stuff like that. So basically they're biting off a lot from the Shokz, not just being bone conduction, but they're really trying to recreate the formula for better or worse. I mean, it would be nice to maybe see them do their own thing a little bit and stand out, because there are some of the things that they copied from Shokz that are not my favorite about the Shokz, including like that button configuration. For example, like I feel like on most products, I would expect, you know, this button to be the power on and off, but it's not. That's like your play pause button, and to do power on and off, you actually have to hold volume up, which is pretty atypical of Bluetooth, but it's exactly what Shokz does. So I don't know why they necessarily decided to copy that. But yeah, let's I don't know, that's the physical stuff. Let's see, anything else worth talking about? I mean, I think like they both claim similar waterproofness, although the Shokz might have a little bit better waterproofing. They claim similar battery life at around 8 hours of listening time. And again, the price is almost exactly the same, 130 bucks versus 120 bucks. So why would you go with the Haylous? All right, let's move those out of the way for now, and let's just talk about the Haylou. Let's talk about, first of all, what's the stuff I like on this, right? What are the pros? So for starters, the bone conduction on this is good. All right, I talked about those other bone conduction sets not being any good. Haylou described them as being counterfeit. I don't know if I'm going to throw out accusations of anyone being counterfeit, but I will say that these are very good. These are up there with the Shokz for me in terms of the effectiveness of the bone conduction audio. The other thing that I think is actually really stand out here about the Haylous is their multi-point connection. So the Shokz do also support multi-point, but, and here's a bit of a complaint about the Shokz. The way that they do multi-point is not too bad, but if I connect to both my computer and my phone, it generally works pretty well. But if I then step away from my computer, like I go on a walk after I've turned these things on, they will just incessantly try to connect to my computer that's in the house, you know, a mile away. They'll just keep beeping and trying to connect, which is really obnoxious. The Haylous, they don't do anything like that. And in fact, I really found that the multi-point performance on this was pretty stellar. Usually multi-point Bluetooth is quite clunky. I'll be honest, I don't use it very often, but because I had that issue specifically with the Shokz, I wanted to test it here with the Haylous. And I've ended up using these a lot in a multi-point scenario where I will have these connected to my laptop and my phone. And when they're connected to my laptop, that just means in the evenings I'm watching YouTube with these things on, or, you know, during the day I'm taking video calls in the living room with my laptop. And then when I go for a walk, I just walk away and the Bluetooth connection, you know, pretty seamlessly switches over to my phone. And I've been really pretty impressed with it. And so that feature alone has honestly been a big reason why I've been continuing to use these things for the past couple of weeks. Other things that I like about this, Bluetooth range on this set is actually really good too. And I don't know how much of this is up to the Haylous themselves and how much of it is my MacBook, frankly. The Bluetooth connection on the MacBook is pretty insane, but I can walk all around my house with my MacBook in my living room, no dropouts at all. I can go into my garage. I went into my backyard. I was cleaning my chicken coop, I kid you not, while listening to these things connected to my laptop in a living room, not very close, and they were perfectly fine. In fact, like when I go for my walks, a lot of the times these will stay connected to my computer until I'm like a block away from the house, which I don't understand it. Again, maybe that's entirely because of the MacBook, but I don't think it's entirely the MacBook's doing there. So I think really good Bluetooth range. And then the form factor stuff that I talked about, I think is actually really good on this. Let me, you know what, I don't need to be wearing these headphones right now, so I will pull them off and give you a bit of a fit demonstration. Part of the reason that I like Shokz headphones or Bone phones much better than others is because of the fit. And in fact, Shokz does have a cheaper set called the Open Move that fits worse. It fits worse than Shokz other stuff. It's like you go for the cheaper Shokz and the sacrifice is the fit. Here with this set, I don't think there's really much sacrifice with the fit. I would say these things fit just about as good as the Shokz. I guess I'll pull on the Shokz for comparison. These are the Shokz. The Shokz are maybe a little bit snugger. You can see that around here, the back of my neck, the Shokz are maybe a little bit smaller. And this is not the small version of the Aeropex. They do make a small version. But just the only size that the PurFree comes in happens to be just a smidge larger back here, which could be good for people with larger heads. But if you've got smaller heads, there's just going to be more back there tapping your neck, which is a phenomenon I've certainly gotten used to. Okay, so generally pretty happy with the fit on this set. And then, I don't know, I guess that about covers like the things that I think are really positive. Again, I mentioned it's got effective bone conduction. Really what I'm talking about is that the sound quality in this set is pretty solid. But let's talk about how this thing, some things that maybe I don't like quite as much versus the Shokz. So the big difference is going to be, well, there's I think two big differences. One of them is the difference in a trade-off. The other is, I think, just actually a downside, but we'll talk about it. So that difference in the trade-off is going to be in the frequency response. So the Shokz here, let me pull these back in. These actually have like a built-in EQ, which is just two settings. It's got like the normal sound mode, and then it's got a sound mode that is optimized for wearing earplugs. That might sound weird, but these actually come with earplugs because I think a lot of people, you know, it's basically a thing that you can still listen to while you're wearing earplugs, and that's a use case that some people have. I don't use it personally, but to go along with that earplug use case, these things have an EQ that basically brightens up the sound signature, reduces the bass, gives you more treble, and that has the effect of just working better when your ears are plugged in. The Haylou, however, it doesn't have such an EQ in it. And again, for me, I don't really care because I don't use it with earplugs, but the default sound on this set is a lot like the earplug sound on this set, which is to say the Haylou has less bass and more treble. Why I say that's a trade-off. One, I guess if you're wearing earplugs, this will sound better than this one will in its default EQ. When this one's in the earplug EQ, they'll sound about the same. But basically this one's kind of optimized for earplugs, and they do include a pair of earplugs in here as well. The other reason why this is kind of a trade-off is when I'm listening to podcasts, I actually don't care that there's less bass. In fact, I might prefer that there's less bass. When you're listening to vocal recordings and stuff like that, or, you know, if you're listening to music, it's one thing. But if you're listening to voice recordings in a podcast, or even a YouTube video like this, having a lot of bass in the mix can actually be kind of a detriment to being able to understand what people are saying. And so the tuning on this definitely favors the high frequencies, definitely favors vocals at the sacrifice of bass, which just means that when it comes to music, I actually found the treble on this a little bit fatiguing, which was interesting. But again, music is not my primary use case. So for me, that was a pretty minor issue. The more significant issue, and the one that's really not a trade-off, is just that the built-in microphones on this thing suck. I've never had so many complaints about a microphone as I have when I've been using this thing during video conferencing. It's a couple fold, so like you can see there is a microphone here on the right side. And when I was just like putting my hand on my chin like this, I was completely blocking off sound to the microphone. And then even in the best of scenarios, when the person I was talking to would remind me, hey, I can't hear you, I would remove my hand from my chin. And even in the best of scenarios, it sounded like the sound quality was still pretty lackluster. So I don't know that it's great for video conferencing as much as I would love for it to be. What I've been doing instead is I've still been using it for video conferencing. I just will switch to the microphone in my MacBook rather than the microphone in this. And as it turns out, a MacBook actually has a pretty good microphone anyway, so that's not such a bad solution, but it certainly would be nice to not have to worry about it. I haven't tried taking a phone call on my phone. I can imagine that being kind of a problem. So I don't know. Those are my short thoughts here on the Haylou PurFree. If I were to rate this thing, I guess I can rate it, right? I'd give this thing 4 stars out of 5. You know, despite my complaints that I just gave there, it's a little bit bright in the tuning, which for music I think is not good, but for vocals is actually not bad. And then the microphone is kind of not usable. Apart from that, though, bone conduction is very effective, and you get solid battery life on this thing, and it's comfortable, and that multi-point pairing is so good that I think I'm going to keep using this thing, even though I've got my Shokz. I mean, I'll still use my Shokz for some things, but around the house, going between my laptop and my phone, that's a pain in the butt in the Shokz, and that actually works really well here. So I do, again, wish that the price was a little bit lower, make it an easier argument for the Haylous. But at 120 bucks, this is not a bad set, and I would say this is successfully the first non-Shokz bone phone that I want to use. So there you go. That is the Haylou PurFree. Let me catch up with live chat now. Okay, talking about bone phones.